Good morning. My name is Anna Hepler, and I'm a senior English major. Today's Convo speaker is Christy Coleman. Both the writer and the aspiring museum professional in me are particularly honored to be introducing Ms. Coleman to you, as she has built an illustrious career serving as Chief Executive Officer of some of the nation's most prominent museums, while also writing numerous articles and screenplays, not to mention her work as a public speaker and her appearances on several national news and history programs. My coursework in the English department here at Carleton often asks me to question how narratives reflect the context in which they were written, and to consider the power that written narrative has to shape our understanding of the past and project a certain image of ourselves into the future. Ms. Coleman examines and critiques the narratives that we hold about the past on a grander scale than exclusively the written word. She's a tireless advocate for the power of museums, narrative correction, diversity, and inclusiveness. She's an innovator and leader in the museum field, having held leadership roles at the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History, and the American Civil War Museum. She now serves as the executive director of the Jamestown-Yorktown Foundation. She served as the historical consultant for the award-winning film Harriet and Showtime's Good Lord Bird. She's most recently appeared in award-winning documentaries Grant, Abraham Lincoln, Black Patriots, Civil War Heroes, Neutral Ground, and When the Monuments Came Down. Ms. Coleman is the recipient of numerous awards for her decades of impact, including 3 honorary doctorates. In 2018, Time magazine named her one of the 31 people changing the South, and in 2019, Worth magazine named her one of 29 women changing the world. Now, please join me in welcoming to Carleton College, Christy Coleman.
Good morning, everyone. So glad to see you all here. I want to thank everyone responsible for the invitation to bring me here to Carleton College. I thought coming from Virginia, coming in February was probably not going to be a good idea, but I was told you all are having a warm snap. I also want to thank the students that are here by choice, and I greatly appreciate that, and I promise to make this worth your while. At least I hope so. I tend to, because I work in museums, I have more than just the teacher's voice. I have that we're walking, okay? So as we talk this morning, I may move away, and those of you who are a little further away, if for some reason the mic is not catching this, which it seems to be catching everything, please let me know, because I do tend to walk and talk. Plus, I've been told this is not stationary, and if I lean, it could just go that way. So, all of that being said, again, I thank you all so much for inviting me to join you this morning. When people ask me what I do, or who I am, or all of those kinds of things that you get into, I more recently, I can say, oh, I'm a museum director. And I've realized that that is not enough, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I am a public historian. Now, what exactly does that mean? It means that it's my job to take the work of academics, like some of you may choose to be one day, and actually make it accessible to the public by using the artifacts that we may have in our collection, the archival materials, the spoken word, actors, computer screens, whatever that is, to help make history accessible, but more important, usable. So in a certain way, the public historian has the public at its fore. We are always thinking about the public, where an academic has this extraordinary luxury to think about the subject, right? I got to be thinking about those multiple things, and here's part of the reason why. Part of the reason we have to do that is because when you say, I'm a historian, or, what do you think about history and all of that, we recognize on the public history side that really when we're asking that question, or we're meeting with public audiences, one of three things start going through their brain and how they process what history is. And what's interesting is, according to a study by the American Historical Association, about 3/4 of Americans, anyway, think that history is just a date, a name, an event. Okay? And that is tied up into this triumvirate that I think about with regard to the work. So there's actually history. There's this thing called memory, and then there is heritage. Okay? Now, history is that thing that is forensic. It is the documents that have been left behind, the artifact, the material culture, the thing that's been dug up out of the ground, the oral histories. It is all of those things, that forensic evidence that a good historian, a good academic historian will tell you, well, any historian, public or academic, will tell you that you have to cull from multiple sources to give you a rich picture of what really happened. And unfortunately, in the age that most of you all either grew up in or are living in, we have to contend with that individual, that provocateur, who will grab one thing and say that that is the history. And it's not. But I digress. I'll come back to that moment in a moment. Memory is this other thing. Memory are the experiences that we ourselves carry with us, things that happened to us. And it often frames our perspective about the historical past. Okay? Memory is powerful because it is visceral. Last but not least in this mix is heritage. Heritage are the things that you are told or grow up knowing from your community, however your community is defined. Okay? It is how, at least where I'm from in Virginia, we were always told growing up that the Civil War was not about slavery and the South didn't go to war to keep their slaves. I'm black. I have memory of grandparents who lived through segregation. My parents were, are boomers who grew up and came of age in the modern civil rights era. Our perspective on some of this stuff is a little different because they pass those stories on to us. And quite frankly, as so eloquently shared by another young woman, young scholar that I met, she said, black people wear slavery on our skin. It's how we look. We wear its residuals on our skin, right? But I digress. Now, imagine for just a moment, if you thought about an event, a date, or a person from the past, and you were trying to create an exhibit or an experience for your community about that person, and you started leaving out details. Now, this is where I want to do a little back and forth with you. Because over dinner last night, I was bringing up the point that the older I get, even though I have a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old, our sort of generational thing is different. So for my generation, Gen X, for us, it was the Challenger disaster. It was like a big deal. When our spaceship blew up and people died, right? I mean, that was like, we were in school, most of us were in school watching it live, and all of a sudden, the Challenger who had the school teacher and the black person and the Asian, it was our like Star Trek moment, right? And the thing blew up in front of us. It's crazy. Then the the millennials moment is 9/11, right? I mean, they remember that, as do most folks who are older who also experienced that day. When I started thinking about Gen Z, you Zoomers out there, I had a harder time trying to figure out what's your moment. My son told me what his was, my 20-year-old. But I'm curious. Just shout out for me what you consider a defining moment of your generation. Shout it out. Say what?
Presidential election of 2016.
Really? All right, he said the 2016 election. What else is out there? COVID-19. Well, yeah. Anything else? The what? The Arab Spring. Okay. Thank you. That's really interesting to me. Because for my 20-year-old son, his moment was Trayvon Martin getting killed. And what it also struck me in asking you all that question is nobody said anything about school shootings, because I guess it's just become, oh, you did? Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I was kind of surprised, because I was like, unfortunately, that happens to you guys consistently. I can't even imagine what that stress is like, because my 17-year-old has already told me, I know the guys that are most likely to do that in my school, and I make sure I talk to them every day. And that's crazy to me. What's the point of all of this? Is because each of you have attached to what you consider pivotal moments of your generation, you have a memory attached to it. And more than likely, that memory is not necessarily informed completely by the forensic of what really happens. So I'm going to back up a little bit and try to kind of cross-generationally, and I know I'm leaving out you college students because y'all were born after this event, most of you, is about 9/11. I can guarantee you that everyone that was minimally 12 years old when that happened can tell you where they were when they heard it, or what they saw, and how they felt, and how it changed things. Raise your hand if I have just made a relatively accurate statement, if you're in that age group. Now, that memory is combined with others in your community. And together, you guys will create a heritage narrative around that event. We were attacked, and we had to respond. And we did, we no longer can go through the airport without taking off our belt and our shoes and our this and our that, right? But it was important because we had to fight terrorism. There's some kind of narrative depending on your community around that. We went to war with Iraq to defeat the terrorists, even though the Iraqis had forensically nothing to do with 9/11. It was predominantly Saudis. But that's where our oil comes from, right? So forensically, we have some disconnects. And so when we started thinking about, as a nation, and especially in my field, when they started having conversations about what the 9/11 museum was going to be in New York City, it literally took 15 years to come up with what that museum was going to be, because of these highly visceral memories and emotions, the heritage making that formed itself around first responders, and when all of a sudden first responders became our new heroes in an American vernacular. I mean, people, thank you for your service and all this stuff was rarely ever said before 9/11 to first responders. I'm just telling you, right? So we create this whole thing. And then when the folks started saying, well, this is the forensic that we got in association with that event, and why Osama bin Laden picked September 11th, and how it is tied to other events in the historical past, and how Europe carved up Africa, and how it is, and you start throwing in all of these other reasons that he said, whether his tactics or not, that's not what we're debating at the moment. It's like all of these forensic reasons or things that were happening in the course of that event, right, start to fade away because of the memory and the heritage making, to the point that when the museum opened, they literally did not include anything in there about the hijackers. And sometimes heritage making can be so profound that it passes from generation to generation despite the forensic evidence. Perfect example I'm going to give you. How many of you in this room have heard George Washington never could tell a lie, chopped down a cherry tree, and had wooden teeth? Raise your hands. None of that is true. He couldn't chop down a cherry tree because where he grew up in Virginia, they didn't grow. He could certainly tell a lie because he was a human being. Social scientists tell us that we lie on average 30 times a day. These aren't whoppers necessarily. These sometimes are like, oh, what do you think of my hair? It's cute, it works for you. Does this make my butt look big? No. Which one were you going for? Right? We lie. Lies of omission, lies of comfort, lies to make people feel good, and then sometimes the out and out big whoppers. It's what we do. And then finally, the wooden teeth thing. George Washington's false teeth, and he had several sets of them over the years, but his false teeth, every single pair, were made of ivory and human teeth that came from his enslaved people. And how do we know that? Because there are actually 2 sets in museum collections. And we have his financial records where he paid his French doctor for the production of them, and the records of his French dentist who said which of the slaves he actually acquired them from and how much money he gave them for the particular tooth, whether it was a molar, an incisor, or whatever. Now, here's the question. Why, with such pernicious untruths, persist in American culture? Because we needed them to. When the young nation was starting out, you have, 13, I'm glad I backed away from there. We had 13 different colonies, all with slightly different origin stories, different needs, expectations, etc. And they had to, in their decision to form this young nation and the compromises that they made with one another to advance this idea, well, in the first, say, 50 years or so of the formation of the nation, there had to be a way to keep it together. And sort of that rallying cry became the father of our country. George Washington gets this moniker, right? And he's got to be representative of the nation's virtues, right? Liberty and justice for all men created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, all of that good stuff. And George had to be the guy, right? George was the guy, because George also showed us about transfer of power. He certainly could have stayed on as president. Alexander Hamilton encouraged him to do it. You know, y'all saw the film. That was one of the, y'all saw the movie or the play or whatever. But Washington understood that they were not trying to establish a new type of monarchy or a constitutional monarchy. They were really trying Republican government. It was a risk. But the nation needed a figurehead. It needed something to hold on to. So a guy who was trustworthy and true can't tell a lie no matter what, right? And a guy who, even though he's an enslaver of, at different points in time, over 500 people, that somehow that he is just, right? Because, you know, he did put in his will that he was going to free him, and that's important. But the fantasy Washington became far more important as the nation were growing. So you can imagine why, on a certain level, there are individuals who feel like exploring George's naughty bits is problematic because he's the father of our country. You know, to a certain degree, they'll let you have Jefferson, right? If you want to look at America's naughty bits, you can mess around with Jefferson, but don't mess around with George. Because there are people that claim George is their ancestor too, and we actually have his hair. But they will not allow even a snippet of it for the DNA analysis. Right? But I digress. The larger point here is that history is really fun. It's really dangerous when it's weaponized. And unfortunately, we are cycling into, or have cycled into, another round of the history wars. And places like my museums, we have to navigate the crazy, right? We have to navigate it. And what makes me so insane about all of this is that we're having to navigate from several different places. Again, 3/4 of Americans think that history is just about a name, a date, and an event. 69% of Americans get their history from a documentary, film, or television show. Now, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. Depends. Are we watching Ancient Aliens or what? Another 66% of Americans get their understanding about history from fictional film and television, i.e. historic fiction. And sometimes that can work to your advantage. I'll give you an example of, because I'm a big pop culture thing. I mean, I may work in the past, but I love science fiction and comic book movies and, you know, sci-fi, all that stuff. I have loved it since I was a kid. I have chosen not to give any of that up, much to my children's embarrassment when I go to Comic-Con. So, but fictional TV and film, which is part of the reason why when I found a way into that world to help the screenwriters and the producers at least get a little bit closer to authenticity with their films, it became a big deal to me because we've all seen, oh, a little note for you. There's this wonderful thing that happens on Twitter on Sunday nights at 8 p.m. called Historians at the Movies. And it's all kinds of movies. It's not just historical film. But if you're interested, I strongly suggest you check it out because it's a lot of fun, believe it or not. Because we not only will tell you what's wrong, but then we'll tell you the possibilities. And yes, historians do love movies too. But this historic fiction, and I'm going to give you an example. So when I was working on Harriet, and I have to say the producers for Harriet reached out to me because of a documentary where I was a talking head in a documentary. And you know what I mean when I say talking head, right? Okay, great. You know, I'm the person that sits there and goes, well, so-and-so did so-and-so and so and so and so and so. And I'm fairly animated, so people like to put me in their documentaries. And so the producers at Harriet reached out to me and said, hey, we're doing this film and da-da-da-da-da, and you know, we need you to sign an NDA because we don't want the world to know we're working on this film and da-da-da. And I was like, great, okay, I'll be happy to work with you. What do you need me to do? And they said, well, we want you to review the script. So I reviewed the script. And I had a moment. And I thought, okay. And I had to kind of take a deep breath, because what a lot of people don't know about me is that I actually got into museums from theater and acting and directing. That was what my great love and passion when I was a college student, which is why I dropped out of college, because I went to college because my parents, well, I went to college because I had to go to college, but my parents said, yeah, the acting thing is really great, but you need to be able to pay your bills. And I also had an interest in social justice because my parents were very politically active and would drag me around handing out flyers and stuff when I was a kid, right? I had to do that, you know? And so, you know, I don't regret any of that. But it made me more like, you have to serve. Service becomes a big key in community, right? So anyway, so I decided I'd go to college to become a lawyer because then I could set my own hours while I became an actor. Don't ask me, I was, 18. Point being, you think you know what you want to do with your life? You don't. You might have it all planned out. I'm telling you, be open. Follow your passions, because your passions will always come back to you and you will be infinitely happy. And believe it or not, you'll actually end up earning the living that you wanted. But I digress. Back to the Harriet thing. So I read the script and I was like, oh. But what I do understand about script writing is that it's a 3-act structure, and that 3-act structure has a protagonist journey, and there's got to be an antagonist, and there's got to be these moments, right? A good script has essentially 60 big beats. That none of that means a whole lot unless you're an English major or creative arts major. But anyway, I understand this about scripts, so I'm reading the script, and technically it had all of those things. Authentically, it had a lot of problems, and there were some characters that literally made me cringe. A couple of them actually made it to the screen. So here's the thing that I already knew, but was doubly informed about Harriet. A producer can hire you to do this work as a consultant for them. They do not have to listen to you, okay? But anyway, so I review the script, send the script back, they start filming, and they call me and say, hey, can you come out to set? Because my contract was not only just about script review, but about what happens once they get on set and some post-production related stuff. So, and yes, I have a day job on top of that. And so I go out to set, and when I'm walking across the field to where they're filming, and I'm looking at what I'm looking at it, I'm going, what the heck, man? What are they doing? And it was chaos. And it was supposed to be, it's a scene where Harriet's brothers are working in the field, and Harriet is making the decision to finally leave, but it's a field scene. And when I tell you, they had people with rakes and hoes, and some people were standing over here and some people over there, and kids were running around, and a guy was on a horseback, supposed to be the overseer, and he wasn't overseeing nothing, and it was just a mess. It was just a chaotic mess. And I get there and I go to the director, and she literally has her hands in her face and her head is down. And I walk in, I said, hey, Cassie, what's going on? What do you need? She said, I can't make this scene work. She said, I can't get the shot. It's just, I can't make it work. And I said, well, I guess you can't. I said, what are they doing? And she said, I don't know. And I said, okay, give me 20 minutes to fix this for you. And she says, okay. So they start resetting, and I'm out in the field with the actors. And I tell them, I'm like, okay, so first of all, get the set dressers over here because we need to have rows going like this, you know. And they were in a field that had already been cleared. I mean, this was an actual farm that they were on where they were filming. And the field had already been cleared from corn. So now this scene needs to be a scene about rotate historically, because I also know how to do stuff historically, right? Not just read about it, but to do it, because I work in museums. Yeah, I can gut a pig. Sure enough, right? But anyway, so I'm showing them and I'm fixing it, and I get them, and then I realize that the actors, some of these actors, I kid you not, had no idea how to use a yard tool. So now I got to teach them how to swing a hoe. Right? So while the set dressers are doing their thing, I am literally showing them how to do it and how they have to do it in succession to clear the field. So we get it all done. It took me more than 20 minutes. It ended up taking me about 30 minutes to get it done, but I got them all reset into the space, gave the children actual jobs, which was clear the field of the stones. There were a lot of little rocks in the way. So the kids now have something that makes sense. And then I go to the overseer and I'm like, dude, okay, your job is not to walk in between these people while they're working, while you're riding that horse. You need to be on the peripheral. And this is how you do it. If there's a problem, you have to dismount. You are not going to bring that horse in the middle of the field, right? So we go through this whole thing, and I step back and I say, okay, do your thing. And she's reset the cameras and she starts filming it and she's like, oh my God, thank you, right? It was great. You know, little things like going into the house and, you know, seeing that the silver wasn't clean. And I was like, they got slaves. There is no way they're gonna host a dinner and have silver that is not shining when they got household slaves. Do y'all know how to clean silver? And the set dressers, God bless them, you know, go out and get all the stuff to clean up the silver. You know, going into the slave quarter and no, they wouldn't have this, but they'd have this. And this is where they'd supplement. And this is, I mean, so that's the work of a historical consultant, or at least one like me, which is why I started getting hired all the time to do it. And I kind of have to, you know, balance it out. I'm saying all of that to you because recognizing that 69% of people are getting their history from these sources, I'm a public historian. I have to go where the people are too, right? To help straighten that out. And so, and I enjoy that work because you know who the bottom three are in terms of where people get their historical knowledge? A college course, only 8%. Interestingly, a DNA test at 11%. History-related video games at 11%. So, for those of us that are at historic sites and museums, we do a little better. 38% and 35 to 38% get their historical knowledge by visiting a museum or a historic site. And in terms of those manuscripts that you all are writing, it's about 30%. And this data set comes, again, from the American Historical Association. It did this study in 2020. And all of this, again, is important because, again, if those primary sources, this is part of the reason why Dinesh D'Souza claims to do documentaries, because it's recognizing that people are now able to create these works and spread them in very narrow scopes to get a message out that can be really, really harmful. And this current history war really isn't happening to the degree that we think it is. And a study was done by a group this year, it was released just this fall, by a group called More in Common, which is a worldwide organization that looks at issues of disagreement, disengagement, et cetera, conflict in politics, et cetera. And they did a study called Diffusing the History Wars, Finding Common Ground and Teaching America's National Story. And what they found is only 14% of Americans hold what we consider extreme views. And those extreme views are, if you are more conservative, like super, super conservative, you believe, according to the study, there is a belief that American history should only be about the celebratory moments, and that the left, as a writ large, the left is trying to tear down America's story, history, and culture. That is an extreme position. The problem is the provocateurs of that position have gotten very good at convincing the middle ground that that's actually what's happening. For example, they were quoting a woman in this particular study who got so worked up over this because of her very narrow sort of media focus that she has a teenager, and she's like freaking out with the teenager. I don't want you to learn any of this stuff, and I know your teachers are trying to indoctrinate you, and da la la la. And the kid was like, what are you talking about? That doesn't happen in my class. It's never happened. See, here's my work. I mean, we talk about stuff in its fullness, and we talk about the pros and the cons, and we talk about the mistakes that America has made, and we're at different points in time. They've tried to correct those mistakes. That's what I learned in school. What are you talking about? And the woman was so taken aback and shared that story in the study. Conversely, the extreme progressive believes that the right wants to completely erase people of color and women and LGBTQ+ from America's narrative in favor of a purely patriotic, non-judgmental approach. But again, both of these extremes only represent 14%, but they get all of the coverage. And they have managed to convince us that the other 70+%, 80+%, are in this camp. And they're not. They're not. The majority of Americans share very similar views. Our history absolutely has some jacked up stuff. We ought to know about it so that we can fix it. And we have examples of people who have fixed it either through their activism, their political action, their whatever, right? That's where the majority is. And that's the space that I, as a public historian, have to live in that hope. And I have to be able to shut down when people come in and go, oh, you all did an exhibition on wokeness. No, we didn't. We did an exhibition that talked about how the Stuart monarchy impacted American early politics and how that laid out some things that are still with us today, like transfer of power. And yes, we have a video that shows different points in time in American history about transfer of power, starting with George Washington, and yes, ending with January 6th. But there were other moments where things were a little shaky. Nothing as dramatic as that, but that's what the video is about. And all of a sudden, we are woke. And this person, a 14%er, decided they were gonna put out something on Yelp or Google, some one of them things, to say that Jamestown has gone woke with their crazy new executive director. That would be me. I think at the end of the day, the best thing that we all can do is turn down the temperature sometimes and shift the conversation, and you take power from the crazy, not always by countering with facts. So they'll say, well, facts, I have my own facts and stats, right? Because half-truths do not make the whole, right? That's why I like working in museums, because again, we have all of these tools at our disposal. We can use film, we can use artifact, we can use memory to help tell stories. And I'll give you an example, one last example before I open the floor. And when we talk about thinking historically and taking all of these data sets that I've just shared with you and thinking about how we create an experience for our guests, okay? So, and in doing so, create a space where there's shared learning, right? So, at my institution, we used to refer to an event that took place in March 1622, the institution, used to refer to it as the Massacre of 1622. The Massacre of 1622, where Powhatan and his forces go to Jamestown and essentially wipe out like 70% of the settlers. Take them out. It's the massacre. And the survivors only survived because one faithful Indian who had lived among them warned them of Powhatan's plan. And so that person and the survivors are held up like heroic. That's how the story has been told for a really long time. Now, the forensic told us something completely different. The forensic, even John Smith's own writings, said that Powhatan was growing increasingly angry and problematic because their continued failure to recognize his sovereignty, because their expectation was that he was supposed to give recognition and sovereignty to the King of England. And Powhatan was like, I'm my own king and you are my land, dude. I will not do it. So there's that. Powhatan expected fealty from the English settlers because they were on his land. And he told them, you may stay in this area. You may not move outside of the area. You can build as much as you want, but do not extend past this area. But two things happened in 1619 that are of great import. Actually, three things. The first thing was the establishment of the General Assembly in Virginia in the spring of 1619. And then among their first acts was to import more white women to make the settlement more stable and to have more children. They had already had children in the settlement, but they needed more women for all these single men running around who were, forming relationships with Indian women or black women, African women, because African women show up in August of 1619. Another thing happens, and that is tobacco is really flourishing, and it is a variety like England is getting hot for. And they need labor to make it work. All of this happens in 1619 at Jamestown. So Powhatan, because it's his land, it's his people, again, have told the English, do not spread beyond these borders. And they continue to defy him over and over again, to the point where he's like, I'm not even going to trade with you anymore because I told you you're not listening and trouble is coming. He warned them. And when they sit down in 1622 to discuss how all of this is going to work over what was supposed to be a dinner, his representative chiefs who were sent to negotiate with the English poisoned them. Poisoned the chiefs. So what did Powhatan do? We're going to have to take them out. Just like we did the Spanish. Who were there first, by the way? Did y'all know that? Yeah, the Spanish were in Jamestown first. They didn't call it Jamestown. It was a mission. They called it something else, but you know. Our history is so diverse. I mean, like from the beginning. But back to my story. So that's what the forensic told us happened. But here's the story of the 1622 massacre. But this is the more detailed story of what happened. And so what we've done is we've taken that more detailed story and put it into interpretation. And now I'm woke. See how that happens? Now, it is not about judgment. It is about putting the information out there so that folks can really have a deeper understanding. And when you have a deeper understanding and you begin to look at all of this, and then you look at the Treaty of 1624, which comes out of it, to which there is literally 2 tribes in Virginia that are still subject to this Treaty of 1624, where they have to go and deliver a harvest and game to the governor of Virginia in the most bizarre ceremony you can imagine, still happens in 2022. Where they dress up in their regalia and they go to the governor's mansion and they bring the deer or the sheep or the goat or the heart so that they can keep their land in 2022. Do you hear what I'm saying here? So there is a direct historical connection, and I believe it is our responsibility as public historians to help the public understand that save this one, and even that one, America has never, whether it was under English rule, whether the French did a whole lot better, I mean, and you know, that occupied the Mississippi Valley and the northern areas, as did the Germans, and how they treated indigenous peoples compared to what the English did in the mid-Atlantic. But what's interesting to me is that the United States, to this day, does not honor its treaty with indigenous sovereign nations. And there is a history of why that happens over and over and over again. Hell, in the 1980s, federal law was passed called the Native American Grave and Repatriation Act, NAGPRA. And there are institutions, museums, and other institutions around the country that still haven't complied to a simple request of return our dead and their burial funerary back to the tribes. If it wasn't handed to you, given to you, if it was taken or looted, give it back. That's what the law was designed to address. Less than 10%, after almost 30 years of materials have returned to those tribes. So we have work to do. But you won't understand that unless you come into these spaces and you learn. Or obviously go see a documentary. The point is, I don't give up, because at least we're in the middle, and there's opportunities to grow. There's opportunities for partnerships with academic historians. There's opportunities with filmmakers to help us all understand and appreciate our history in a very different way, because it is a shared history. It is a diverse history. This nation was not built as a white man's nation. It certainly had white supremacy, but it has been diverse from its origins. From its origins, variety of indigenous peoples, varieties of Europeans and different religions from the beginning. And so this fantasy that has been touted, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, is really fascinating and destructive. Because guess what? They only represent 14% of us. And it's time for the rest of us to step into that space, have these conversations, and inform ourselves more deeply. And on that, I'm going to stop, because I wanted to give you time in the last 10 minutes before you have to go to your next class or whatever it is that you got to do, and I get to go have lunch, to give you an opportunity. If there are any questions, please raise your hand. I'll repeat the question, and then I will answer it as succinctly as possible, which isn't always possible, but I'll try.
Thank you very much, Ms. Coleman. I just want to interrupt one super quick thing. And speaking of the lunch with Ms. Coleman, that's going to be at the Great Hall today. So if you have RSVP'd, we're going to be in the Great Hall, not in AGH. If you haven't RSVP'd, it's kind of a full house this time. So sorry about that. But now, the questions and
you got a
the
question?
answers.
Anybody? I see a hand in the middle. Is that you up top? No, you were just waving to somebody downstairs.
Okay.
No, sorry, over there. Okay, there, and then over here. Okay, yes, go ahead, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm from the Detroit metro area, and so I read in your bio that you worked at the Charles H. Wright Museum. And can you talk a little bit about, like, you know, what your work was like there and how kind of the like the culture and the people of Detroit like shaped that work?
Absolutely. So Detroit was my first CEO gig, right? And at the time, the Charles H. Wright was the largest African-American museum in the country. Beautiful building, beautiful stuff. And when I got there, after them building this remarkable place, what I quickly learned is that Black Detroit didn't feel welcome in their museum anymore. It had become too intellectualized and wasn't connecting to their community's needs. And by the way, that's one of the other things that I think public historians have a responsibility towards helping build community and quality of life. So when I went there, I had a lot of conversations with a lot of people about what they wanted to see in that museum. And they just kept saying, we want to see ourselves, we want to see ourselves. And so we worked on that. So if you're familiar with that museum, the And Still We Rise is my work. I curated that show and helped get that show funded and financed. And it was from start to finish showing how Detroit at one point or another is involved in the story of building an African-American community. There, you know, in these larger sort of national stories, where was Detroit? So, for example, the March on Washington, everybody knows, I Have a Dream speech. Well, he gave that speech in Detroit before he went to Washington, right? So stuff like that, you know, and there are thousands of people that showed up and et cetera. So that was one of my things in Detroit, and making better use of the building itself, which is sort of like the stone thing, and the whole, everything kind of echoed in there, and it was, and so we had to make it warm, and we had to help people see themselves, and more partnering with community organizations to come in and use the museum for activities and events. And now, I don't think you can go to that museum on any given night and there's not some social event activity that takes place at that museum. And the last thing that I'll say is Detroiters as a whole, regardless of economic status, Detroiters love arts and culture, and they support it at an extraordinary level. So don't get it twisted. Even those, you know, auto-working folks love their arts and culture in a way that I have not seen in many other communities around the country. So shout out to Detroit. Next question.
I was kind of confused about the statistic you gave up, since most of us have been in public education. We have been to like history classes. Like, how come it doesn't mention that? And also, what is like public historians' responsibility when it comes to public education on history?
I didn't quite get the front part of your question, but I got the last part, so I'll address that. What role do public historians play in public education? And actually, it's a partnership role. For example, we work very closely with state legislatures, especially if you're a state museum, as I am currently in, on standards of learning. And we're having some interesting challenges right now in Virginia after putting together an extraordinary social studies standards of learning. But that's what we do. We work with them and help teachers say, okay, this is your SOL. Here are the activities that can help reinforce it in our museum environment. We also provide teacher training to help teach teachers how to be more hands-on with learning, because every child is not going to absorb by reading. Again, you learn by watching, doing, seeing, being. And so we help educators frame that out. I think we have room for one more question, and there was a hand over here. Maybe two. It's 11:45.
Thank you so much for your convocation speech. I was just wondering, since you've worked in sort of consulting in Hollywood, what do you think is the role of different genres of historic movie aside from drama, like historic comedies or things like that? Do they have different roles to play, or is drama like the best way of presenting history in movies?
I think any genre works. And I'll give you an example. How many of you saw Lovecraft Country or The Watchmen? Okay, y'all really need to expand I know you're college students and you may not have HBO Max, but I'm telling you, some of the best television ever, okay? Both of those, I mentioned both of those, and I told y'all from the beginning, I'm a, sci-fi geek, right? So the Watchmen series is based off of the Tulsa race riots and the idea of an alternate USA in 1985 where reparations are paid to the Tulsa descendants. And that there is and the US has won the Vietnam War, and Vietnam is a state like Alaska, even if it's across the country. It's really fascinating. You don't have to read the whole, mantra of The Watchmen to get that series. But it's based off the Tulsa race riots. And I was really stunned, because I hang out on Twitter way too much, how many people had no idea about the Tulsa massacre now. Not called race riots anymore, it's called the Tulsa Massacre. Because that's exactly what that was. There was no preemptive anything, even though they claimed that they did it because a white woman alleged that a black man said something inappropriate to her. So they burn out a community. But in context, the Tulsa race riots are part of what's called the Red Summer, which actually lasted from like 1919 to 1923, where there was these racially motivated, violent attacks against thriving black communities all over the country, coming out of World War I. Black men who had served were coming home, wanting pensions, wanting recognition, and they were shutting it down. So Tulsa was just one of many communities that suffered. There were riots in Detroit, in Cleveland, in Washington, D.C. Wilmington had the worst one, but that was much earlier in 1898, where the community elected basically a black majority city council and representatives for Congress, and the white community didn't like it, so they literally burned everything down, including the newspaper office, and re-elected and threatened all of the elected officials to get them out of town, and then elected their own people. Duly elected black folks for political roles. This is America. That was a 20th century phenomenon. There were at least 30 different racially motivated attacks against predominantly black communities in the United States, and I can guarantee you the majority of people didn't know anything about it and for this generation, until they saw The Watchmen or Lovecraft Country actually recreated it in one of its scenes, one of its episodes. And it was astonishing. And I'm thinking, how did y'all not know that? If you're black, you knew it, and about some of these other communities. But white America had completely erased it from its textbooks, from its memory, from whatever, or again, dismissed it as it happened because a black man did something inappropriate to a white woman, who, in most of these cases, is how they justified it, even though the majority of these white women lied. Just like they did with Emmett Till. That woman still isn't in jail. She lied on a 14-year-old child who was viciously murdered because of it. So we got to get right with each other, but we can't get right with each other until we get our history right. And on that note, I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you.